My guest, Patrick Abankwa, is still with me, financial analyst and investment advisor, as we look at the fact that Ghana's finance minister is now saying that Eurobond holders will likely have to accept some form of a haircut, a nominal haircut, due to the situation the country finds itself. So, Patrick, I was asking you as we started the conversation, when we look at these haircuts, we've seen Ofori-Atta have to walk back on a few promises he made early on in terms of what would happen to bondholders, what would happen to also those locally as well that have purchased bonds from the Ghanaian government. And now we're seeing that we're at this point of nominal haircuts. What's bringing these losses? What's bringing these nominal haircuts for Euro bondholders back to the table, back into the conversation?
Okay, so what is actually leading to the nominal haircuts in terms of the Eurobond holders has to do with Ghana's debt still being unsustainable according to IMF. When you look at the IMF Sustainability Index, that was shared with the country, that's the finance ministry, and also the country as a whole, we get to a point where paying even normal government workers is becoming a problem, even though the local debt have been restructured. Government's debt is still becoming unsustainable. And that's why the need to bring in foreign debt to also be restructured at this point. So left to the finance minister alone, I'm sure some of these Eurobond issues will not have been affected. But as we speak, they have to be roped in, because if this is not done, it can affect the government of Ghana's second and third that they expect from the bailout was first, and to speak of that, then bonds that are in foreign currencies.
All right, so let's try one more question, Patrick, because we're having some issues with your.
To do that. The second trend by the finance minister keeps backtracking.
All right, so we're having some issues with your connection, Patrick, but I'll ask this quickly to see if we can get a better connection for you. I think the big question would be, are Eurobond holders who are holding Ghana's bond, are they interested? Are they willing to also come to the negotiation table? Because it is somewhat of a negotiation, and Ghana may have to sort of incentivize this for those bond holders. So what are we looking at in terms of that?
Yes, so most of these bondholders have to, take a decision at this point in time. The decision is that either they are willing to accept the haircuts and be able to run away from total default from the government, or they have to now push for a better deal by way of negotiation. So that's what most of the Eurobond holders are at this point. So most of them are trying to either push for a better deal or the possibility of accepting the current deal, which if they don't do, the possibility of complete default on their investment is very high. So they are in a fix. And for me, it has to be an individual bondholder's decision to either accept or not to accept. But the bottom line is that at some point, there will have to be a compromise from the bondholder side or the government of Ghana side.
So let's look at the numbers involved. So the finance minister has said anywhere from 30 to 40% when it comes to the nominal haircut that Eurobond holders may have to accept. But then there's also the conversation around the fact that in terms of the financial instruments, the minister said that coupons may also not exceed 5% with final maturities of not more than 20 years. And that seems to be setting limits on the interest rates as well as the length of time for the bond maturities. What do we think of this in terms of the characteristics, the return rates as well? In the long run, is this something that will make it easier for Euro bond holders to swallow the nominal haircuts that Ghana seems to be offering?
It's quite a difficult time for the Euro bond holders. Whether or not the haircut of 30% is too much to propose depends on a number of factors, including overall health of the Ghanaian economy. The bondholders. If Ghana is able to offer bondholders a favorable restructuring package, such as maybe a higher interest rate or a longer maturity date, then a haircut of 30 to 40% may be acceptable. However, if the restructuring package is not favorable, then bondholders may be less likely to accept such a large haircut. The terms and the conditions for me of the proposed financial instrument, including 5% coupon and 20-year maturity date, could be a turn-off for some bondholders, if you ask me. However, it's important that we note that these terms are being negotiated, and Ghana may be willing to offer some flexibility in order to reach an agreement with these bondholders. I must say it's going to be difficult to say how these bondholders will react to Ghana government's proposal. Some investors may be willing to accept a haircut in order to avoid the risks of a complete default, as I said earlier on. Others may be willing to negotiate for a more favorable restructuring package, or they may hold out for a better deal for another lender, perhaps ultimately the decision that they have to take as to whether to accept or not. It's a business decision that individual bondholders will have to consider and accept or not to accept.
Accept or not to accept. So beyond that, let's look at this in terms of the IMF staff review and the program that Ghana is involved in with the IMF. So that we see that, of course, there's a review that's going to happen. They reached the staff level agreements with the IMF on October the 6th, and that's, of course, with the first review in mind. But with this and then the application of the nominal cuts for the Eurobond, what steps, or do you think the steps are in the right direction? Are we finally seeing Ghana sort of face the right direction when it comes to getting itself out of this quagmire?
Yeah, I think the fact that Ghana reached a staff level agreement with IMF on October 6th regarding the first review of the program, for me, is a positive sign. It suggests that perhaps Ghana is on a track to meet the IMF requirement and to receive the full amount of the 3 billion bailout, as I mentioned. The application of nominal cuts to the Eurobonds is also a positive step. It will help the Ghana government to reduce its debt burden and improve its debt sustainability. Overall, I think Ghana is on the right track to economic recovery. However, I still believe there are some challenges ahead, and it's important for the government to continue to implement the IMF programs and to make progress on these reforms. It has to go through some challenges like we are facing today. We still have inflation quite high. We still have issues relating to depreciation of the cedi quite high. So it will take a bit of time. But once there's an agreement and there's a plan with IMF, I believe that if government follows through to it, we may see the light at the end of the tunnel for Ghana very soon.
All right. Finally, before I let you go today, Patrick, so this is a conversation. What Ofori-Atta is using is may have to accept, so it's not necessarily a done deal. But one, do you think that, yes, bondholders, Euro bondholders are going to have to take that haircut? And then secondly, are we looking at a timeline? Do we have an idea of the timeline in which this needs to be done or which this offer will be made, and then Euro bondholders will need to accept or say no?
I think in the discussions that the minister has been having with the bondholders, I think they are all trying to look at a possibility of reaching an agreement before the end of the year. So by way of timelines, both parties are looking at reaching an agreement before end of the year, because that is also what the IMF agreement is also about. Some of these things, if you don't put a timeline to it and you don't meet at certain times, the funds that you are requiring may not come at some point in time, and it can distort the financial position of the country. So both the Ministry of Finance and these bondholders individually are looking at a possibility of reaching an agreement before the end of the year. And if you look at the positive talks that have come out of the meetings that they had about last week, you can see that both parties.
Unfortunately, as we're wrapping up the conversation, having some technical issues there with the guests, but I think the point that Patrick was making, of course, is you don't put a timeline to these sort of things. Ghana has been in this process for a while now with Eurobond holders as well as with domestic holders of its bond and having some success with the domestic exchange program. And it's a conversation we'll continue to follow with West Africa's second largest economy, cocoa producer, oil producer, gold producer as well, but finding itself in very difficult financial straits. Now with an IMF program and a review coming up in the next few weeks, we're going to know if the IMF and those invested in Ghana's progress are seeing progress. That's it on this episode of Business Edge. You can follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. You can, of course, go to our website, www.newscentral.africa, and download our mobile app as well. 12 p.m. West African time. You have News Central now coming your way. You have a pleasant day.